我是 Holland Sherry 这个品牌的销售经理，我是亚洲地区的销售经理。这个地区包括大概10个不同的国家，有日本，日本是我们最大的市场，在亚洲，有日本、韩国、台湾、香港、大陆，还有东南亚几个国家。可能有些坐在这里的人已经听说过 Holland Sherry 这个英国品牌，但我还有一个小视频想给你们看一下。
Scotland has a long history with wool, the oldest natural fibre known to man. In the mid-1800s, over 250 woolen mills operated in the borders. Few remain. We are still here. In 1836, Stephen Holland and Frederick Sherry first began supplying cloths to London's top tailors. Times have changed, but there is no substitute for the knowledge of generations. From suiting fabrics for summer row to custom cloths for interiors, we remain devoted to our craft. Our mill on the banks of the River Tweed is still our heart. We continue to supply fabric to the world today. Our story continues.
So Holland & Sherry, today is not about Holland & Sherry, but obviously I had to get that out of the way. We're a fabric merchant, fabric supplier, specializing in cloth specifically for bespoke tailors and luxury retailers. And like I say, today's not actually about Holland & Sherry, it's about fabric. Okay, so just briefly what I want to talk about today. I'm not a big fan of PowerPoints, because everyone ends up reading this. But yeah, hopefully you understood my Chinese introduction. The problem is when I speak Chinese, I have to concentrate very hard, so I can't look at you. But first of all, I want to say the world has changed, or it's changing, and it's quite promising for the bespoke tailoring sector and high-end fabric particularly, because I think you probably noticed there's a trend away from maybe ready-to-wear. Not just in suiting or clothing, but everything. People are looking for more personalization, more customization. You know, what's unique to you that nobody else has. So that's playing nicely into the hands of what it is we do as a business. And it's relatively recent development, actually. You know, looking at Suit Walk itself, it's the 5th year. And as a company, it's only something in the last 3 to 5 years, perhaps, we've seen this new interest from younger people actually taking an active interest in classical menswear, or what we used to consider classical menswear. And this has nicely coincided, or perhaps fueled by social media and the widespread prevalence of images and content and knowledge which people can quite easily access and share with their friends. So what we're finding is the knowledge is increasing very quickly, and people care about how they look because everything is online now. Everyone can see everything you wear and do. And at the same time now, I'm sure most of us use social media, and I'm sure most of us follow celebrities or personalities, or you know, people who look and dress good for a living, perhaps. And that always happened on the red carpet, but more recently we're seeing it in popular media. Lots of TV shows. I don't know if people watch things like Suits, Mad Men, Ballers. People like Conor McGregor, who I'm a personal fan of, he's always wearing a three-piece suit. Dwayne Johnson, or The Rock, more commonly known. These people are kind of flying the flag for bespoke menswear and making it relevant to the next generation. Actually, as a fellow Irishman, I'll talk about Conor McGregor later, because there was a famous suit last year which came out, which we got a lot of publicity for. But I'll talk about that later. Moving on to the Brits, David Beckham has always been a good ambassador for the UK. James Bond, the royal family. These guys are really making my life a lot easier, if I'm perfectly honest. Movies like Kingsman, I'm sure everyone's seen Kingsman. And it's all helping to contribute not just to a renaissance in suiting, but particularly British style, British fabric, and the whole quintessentially British. So yeah, things are looking promising. That's partly why Suit Walk's celebrating their 5th year anniversary. It's partly why I'm here, why I have a job, why I like traveling around Asia. Moving on to the next slide, I talked a little bit of detail about the positive trends. One thing I'd like to address is some of the negative, perhaps, misconceptions people have about both the suiting industry and wool in particular as a fabric. So I don't know if this is true in Taiwan, but certainly when I was growing up as a kid in the UK, a suit was a garment for an older man who went to work. It was quite serious. The fabric was maybe dull and scratchy, and it was something you never really wanted to wear, or it wasn't that inspiring. But actually what I hope to show today is that wool and a lot of other natural fibers are very versatile, and the application and the different usage you have range from not just office or formal wear, but to more casual looks that people wear today. You know, you can wear the suit for a whole multitude of occasions that previously would have been considered inappropriate for a suit. And I think part of this confusion came from the fact that for a long time the market was buying polywool, or actually polyester, as a man-made fiber, which is more scratchy. It is, let's say, less breathable, so you feel hotter, and typically it's not that inspiring in terms of an aesthetic look. But again, it's about which fabric is right for which purpose. A polywool suit could be good. It's very good for your first suit, perhaps if it's school uniform or something you want to wear every day, machine washable uniforms, this kind of thing. But when we're getting into the world of luxury, bespoke, natural fibers, typically speaking, anything man-made is taboo. So what I'm going to talk about now is a general fabric introduction to the different varieties of fabric you have, both natural fibers and a little bit on man-made. But within the natural fiber sphere, you have what we call protein or animal fiber and plant or cellulosic fibers. So on the slide here is a list of most of the most commonly used fibers for clothing. I'm sure most of them are familiar to you, probably in different levels. But I'll take each one of these in turn and give you a little bit of an explanation about the history and some of the technical benefits. And actually, it's also worth mentioning I've got a lot of samples here today. So if you are interested in feeling or touching or seeing what each of these look like, chances are we'll have a live sample and I'll be able to share it, pass it around with you later. So starting with, let's call, this is what I mean by technical, cellulosic fibers, which are from plants typically. Silk is a very, very commonly known fabric. It comes from insects, most notably a silkworm, or the silk from a moth caterpillar. It has been used in textile manufacturing for thousands of years, throughout the whole of Asia, Middle East, and most countries have their own quite highly developed silk production, heritage, and capacity. And silk is considered quite a luxurious fabric. Throughout history, it's always been associated with royalty or nobility, and as a result, it's our own social, cultural development that has helped to increase the status of this fabric as a luxury fabric. What we call luster, which is quite basically how well a fabric reflects light. So if it's high in luster, it's normally quite bright and, you could say, alluring. And it's also quite highly regarded for its drape. Silk, when we talk about drape, we talk about how it hangs, how the fabric hangs. And silk, despite being quite a lightweight, summery, and a cool fabric, it actually drapes relatively well. And as a result, all those combination of factors means it's become considered quite an elegant evening fabric, which people wear for formal occasions, both men and women. So staying on the, let's say, non-animal fibers, the next most common one or most prevalent is cotton. Cotton is very soft, fluffy fiber that grows on the cotton plants in many subtropical regions around the world and has been used for thousands and thousands of years. People dispute when it was first used for clothing, but approximately 5000 BC, so over 7,000 years of it. And again, over time, its reputation has grown to be considered a casual, summery, lightweight fabric, particularly suitable for things like chinos. If you think about different fabrics or different sort of manifestations of fabric, cotton is very versatile because it can be used in, like I said, chinos, corduroy, velvet. All these are composed of cotton. Linen is the next plant-based fiber. It's from the flax plants. Not many people may have heard of that. Myself, I hadn't really heard of it before I started working here. But it's probably considered the first known textile ever in the world, from about 8,000 BC. So already 10,000 years it's been used for. It's very absorbent, it's a good conductor, and it's natural resistance on the surface to dirt and stains. So again, this combination of factors make it a very, very cool, casual, summery fabric. And that's something which generally unites the plant-based fibers. They're generally more lightweight, summery, cooler, absorbent fabrics. The downside of all of these, often people claim, is they're quite easy to wrinkle. Plant-based fibers, particularly linen, is very much prone to wrinkle, and if you've been wearing a jacket for even just a few minutes, quite quickly you start to see the creases. Cotton, not so bad, but it's also a feature of a plant-based fiber. But again, that's often, or more and more people consider that a desirable look, so it's a trade-off, whether you're prepared to accept the wrinkles and the creases in favor of this cool, light, summery option. So moving on to animal fibers. Animal fibers is literally the hair off an animal's back. So fundamentally, it's designed to keep the animal warm. And as a result, people assume that they're only best used for autumn-winter clothing. But what I hope to show is actually these natural fibers are very, very versatile in themselves, and they can also be quite easily used for summer fabrics if you have the right considerations and the right quality. Okay, so moving on to the protein fibers, or animal, as it's probably easier to call them. Typically, they're united by the matte appearance, good elastic recovery, so wrinkle resistant in some ways. They're very absorbent in terms of how they take dye. So actually the color capability and the spectrum of colors that you're able to generate using animal fibers is much broader and brighter. I realize I'm making a lot of generalizations here today. It's worth saying that it's not a precise science, and there's a lot of factors that will influence the performance of a garment. But generally speaking, these are, let's say, rule of thumb. But of course, you need to take into account the quality and the composition of different fabrics. Okay, so the first one here is cashmere. I'm sure everyone's heard of cashmere. It's named after the region Kashmir, spelled with a K, which is the region of the natural habitat where the cashmere goat lives, or lived. That region is roughly northwest India, Pakistan, Inner Mongolia. There's a type of Khan cashmere which is considered even higher luxury levels, where the fleece is actually hand-combed. And similar to silk, it has heavy associations with royalty, nobility. It was actually the nobility of Victorian England which first took a liking to cashmere. And all of a sudden it becomes an indicator of social status, which again helps to elevate the value and the price based on common perception. So yes, it's a warm, soft, rare, luxurious fabric, but my point is that it's the cultural development which has helped to raise the standing even more. And that's a common theme which you'll find with a lot of what we consider luxury fabrics. And the example or the analogy I like to draw a comparison would be to, in the wedding industry, a diamond ring. Yes, diamonds are expensive and they are rare, but through their association with weddings and the necessity for a groom to buy one for his wife before he proposes, all of a sudden it becomes an art in branding and marketing, and the price raises and raises. And the next one I want to talk about is mohair. Some people, it's probably less common than most of the other ones I talk about in the protein fiber family. It's from a type of goat called the Angora goat. Angora is a region in Turkey which is where the goats were originally found. And is actually a descendant of the cashmere goat. So there are similarities, and actually a lot of these protein fibers are from a similar group of animals. But as you'll see later, the end result, the end performance, the functionality is slightly different. Sorry, I just realized I mentioned a few things and I didn't give any samples to feel. Yeah, I talked about corduroy, so that's a cotton, a type of cotton. Please feel free to pass it around. I also have some mohair, or later actually, this has got some mohair, this suit, so I'll introduce that later. I'm not sure if I actually brought any myself. It's the one called vicuna, which again is probably even less commonly known, but it's actually the most expensive naturally occurring animal fiber in the world. And there's quite a romantic story about the vicuna, which has brought about this end result. So perhaps I'll share that with you too. So the vicuna is a wild relative of the llama, again, which can be used in clothing, but slightly rare. They're only found in a very, very small region of South America in the Andes. Actually, today, only Bolivia and Peru still have these animals remaining. And as you'll see, perhaps later when I pass around a bit more samples, it's a very small, very cute, golden, silky, fleeced animal. So going back to many centuries ago, the native population, the Inca population, again, as you see, only royalty were allowed to wear the vicuna fleece. So it became known locally in the local language as the cloth of the gods. So there used to be about 3 million vicuna in the world, but then unfortunately when the Spanish arrived and they saw the beauty of the animal, they proceeded to kill most of them in order to obtain the fleece. Because at that time, the shearing practices were such that you kill the animal to get the fleece. So there was a genuine risk of them actually becoming extinct, and it was not until the 1960s when there was less than 5,000 of the animal remaining that the Peruvian government finally stopped the hunting and the trading of vicuna fleeces. Those have been relaxed, and as of about 1995, the trade slowly restarted again, so you can find vicuna in shops again. But again, it's like I say, it's still very rare and it's still very expensive. Sam, how much does that vicuna sell for? 50万英里. So it's not for everybody, I think. That's the point. And so not only has it got heavy association with nobility, royalty, it's considered sacred in the local, it was endangered. It's got all these factors increasing the value, but only 12 tons are produced annually each year, which can be converted into yarn. To compare that to cashmere, there's 25,000 tons. So it's a drop in the ocean. And I just put the prices, like the kind of raw cost prices up there to give you a comparison, just how much more expensive. Sorry, that top one is vicuna. It's over $600 a kilo these days. Wool is $6 a kilo, so it's no comparison. So actually this is, we have one collection here called Imperial Gold, which is 10% vicuna, 90% cashmere. I've got a little book introducing, so have a little glance and pass around at your leisure. I did also bring, so our company did do a 100% worsted vicuna collection a few years ago. We have a little bit left. We keep it in a vault in our head office in Scotland because it's more valuable than gold. And I do have a small sample, which I didn't tell my company I was taking, because they definitely wouldn't let me take it. I trust you guys to pass it round. We just do 3 shades because, yeah, well, I don't want to get into that, yeah. So moving on to wool. So wool, unfortunately, doesn't enjoy the glamour of some of its cousins, you know, silk or vicuna or cashmere. It's been, because you see it on farms everywhere across Europe. It's not got that elegance, it's not got that association with royalty. It's just it's a farm animal, unfortunately. But actually, wool is often misunderstood. It's a particularly high quality wool shares some of the characteristics of cashmere, of vicuna. And when we're talking high quality wool, the vast majority of it comes from Australia. I think the figure here, I've said 90% of the fine apparel wool. So that's anything with a micron count less than 19.5, which roughly equates to a super 80 if you're familiar. And I'll talk about micron count later, super numbers, because it's a very confusing subject and it's often actually misunderstood. But the reason I want to focus on wool is because wool was the original suiting fabric. If we're talking about the UK, it's our, how do I say, it's our speciality. You know, it's particularly around Yorkshire. It was the birthplace of worsted wool fibres. So although we weave the wool in the UK, and there's sheep growing in the UK, unfortunately those sheep aren't good enough to be considered as a fine quality natural fibre used for bespoke suiting. What most people refer to in terms of a breed of sheep would be Merino sheep, which is one of the oldest breeds in the world and has actually been selectively bred for this purpose for over 1,000 years. And again, although sheep can live almost anywhere, if you're trying to create conditions conducive to growing very, very high quality fine wool, what does a sheep need? A sheep lives on sunshine, fresh air and clean water. And our friends in Australia have so much of that. Unfortunately, in the UK, we have less of each of those three things. Well, I know I've only passed around a few samples. This is actually our Imperial Gold collection, so you can have a look at some of the patterns. There's a few patterns with the 22 karat gold pinstripe again, just to further elevate the status of it. And I'd like to do our sheep friends a little favour by adding some romance to the story about Merino. They originally were exclusive property of Spanish royalty, to the point where their export was banned from the 14th century because they were so valuable and so highly prized that they didn't want to let any of them leave the country. So it was during those 400 years, or ever since the 14th century when the export was banned, that the bloodline was refined, and gradually the best, the whitest, the softest Merino sheep were cultivated to the point where the quality was ever increasing and it became as precious as gold. And at that time it started to become considered a mark of royalty, social status, worn by kings and queens. So it did have some of the glamour and the elegance which we now consider with cashmere today, or vicuna today. Eventually, in the 18th century, the King of Spain started using these prized possessions as gifts. So gradually the Merino population was allocated different corners of the world and became considered the gift of kings. And it was only really in New Zealand and Australia, by luck, I guess at the time, it turned out to be perfect, optimized growing conditions for those sheep. Okay, so I know I spent a lot of time talking about the different fabrics there, but I just want to give everyone a kind of quite a comprehensive yet shallow introduction to the various options available to them and why the price is where they are, and what the strengths and perhaps some of the weaknesses can be when considering what fibre is best for you to choose. And being in the textiles industry, we're at the less glamorous side of the supply chain, so we're on the production side or the logistics side. So sometimes we don't get invited to the party with the tailors, the luxury brands, the designers. And, hopefully I've been able to add a bit more glamour to what is otherwise sometimes quite a dull subject with some of those stories. So they were the basic fibres. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but those fibres can be produced in a variety of ways to give a different effect, and we end up calling it a different fabric. So you see tweed, I'm sure you probably heard, it's made from wool. Actually denim, chinos and corduroys and velvets all from cotton. So again, that gives you an indication of the versatility of within a particular fibre itself. Silk as well, there's many versions of silk, Dupioni silk, Thai silk, every country has their own silk. So I briefly already mentioned why wool. Now we'll go into a little bit more detail about types of wool in terms of super numbers and micron count, and this whole minefield of different jargon. So wool is often considered nature's performance fibre, such as its versatility and high performance characteristics just by nature. It's soft, it's fine, it's breathable, and these factors contribute to it being quite cliche, but keeps you warm when it's cold, and it keeps you cold when it's warm. You probably see that everywhere. Everyone uses that tagline for everything, but that was originally used to describe wool and the natural all-round comfort which you can enjoy from a wool garment. So the point I'm trying to make is wool is very, very varied in its quality and production process, which often is neglected, and people consider wool to be all the same. It's all a heavy, itchy, scratchy kind of fabric, which is only suitable for old men in suits at the office. This is a very, very scientific photo of what's a wool fibre looks like, and what I'll talk about in a minute is actually what a micron count is. A micron is a unit of measurement, a unit of distance, very, very microscopic distance. It's 1/1,000,000th of a centimetre. So we're talking about absolutely microscopic distances, and what it's measuring is the diameter across this wool fibre. Okay, this slide may be slightly out of place, but it's just talking about the difference between a worsted and a woolen wool yarn. So again, people forget that there's two different types of wool yarns. A worsted yarn is what you use in a suiting fabric. It's very soft, sleek, and almost silky in appearance. A woolen yarn is what you consider to use for heavy sweaters, blankets, and that's sometimes what people think of when they think of wool, rather than perhaps a nice lightweight suit. And the difference is basically in the production process when they're creating the yarn. A worsted wool has a combed yarn, which is where you align the fibers all in the same direction by combing in one direction. And the result is a fine, smooth, glossy finish suitable for a work suit. A carded yarn, on the other hand, is where it's brushed effectively against the grain to create a fuzzier, matte appearance. So that's when you look at a woolly jumper, it has this kind of fuzzy and perhaps even itchy feel to it. And I've actually got a couple of, this is alpaca, which is a natural fiber I didn't talk about, but again, it's a relative of the same kind of family. And what we've got here is a jacketing collection, which has used a woolen spun alpaca fiber. So you'll feel what I mean in the fuzzy. So that's the basic difference between the worsted and the woolen. Merino, I touched on this already. I'm sorry, my slides are a little bit out of place. I've been traveling for 3 weeks, so I don't know which country I'm in. But yeah, basically it's more than just about the micron number. When you're looking for the best quality wool, you take into account a variety of factors. Staple length, strength, luster, which is how well the fabric reflects light. Sheen is, again, considered a highly reflective fabric, has a high sheen. Crimp is elasticity, so basically how well the crease or wrinkle recovery characteristics are. And I put fiber diameter at the end there just to kind of directly explain what a micron count is. It's measuring the fiber diameter. But my point is each is important, and each is important for different reasons, and you want to take into account what it is you're buying for what occasion and why you should look for a particular type of fabric. For example, something with high elasticity and crimp would make for a better travel suit because it recovers well. It's like a spring in many ways. Something with high luster and sheen looks very glamorous. It's good for evening wear. You know, it's often considered with silk. Then if we're looking at fiber diameter, actually this has become associated with the luxury. The higher the super number, the more luxurious the fabric is. And the reason behind that is because a finer fiber tends to feel softer to the touch. Put that into some context. Carpet wool, the micron count is around 45. Harris tweed, which is considered a very itchy, rough, heavy, scratchy fabric, is around 30. I'm going to pass some Harris tweed around here so you get an idea of what something at the higher end of the spectrum would feel like. Anything over Super 100s is when it starts to become something which we shout about, which we make a marketing angle out of, and that specifically is 18.5 microns and below. So anything over Super 80 is considered a fine quality wool. We start to reference from Super 100 upwards, and as a rule of thumb, a 20 increase in the super number is the equivalent to a 1 micron decrease in the diameter of the fiber. So here, Super 180, which is a very luxurious fiber, is a 14.5 micron. A Super 200, using that calculation, would be a 13.5 micron. Then 12.5 and 11.5. And actually 11.5 is a Super 240, which is the finest cloth ever woven. We do have a sample, which again I took, but unfortunately when I sent it, I didn't carry it with me. I sent it from the Shanghai office and it's been held by customs. So it's not here, but it'll be here next week if you come back to Suit One. But what I'm giving out now is a Super 200 quality, so you'll feel quite quickly what we call the handle. It's very soft and luxurious. Ironically, or at least the trade-off, is that these fabrics are fragile, and as a result they're not suitable for everyday wear. So although they're super luxury, they're not super practical. And so I would always discourage our customers from choosing this fabric unless they're for a wedding or a special occasion. You know, you're only going to wear it once or twice every so often. Again, on the lower end of the spectrum, the disadvantage of a non-fine quality wool is that the fibers are short. So a longer fiber tends to be finer, a shorter fiber tends to be coarser, and it's the shorter fibers which are prone to bobble or pill. So if you see your suit starting to do that, an indication might be it's not as good a quality fiber. So yes, I mean the super count is important when it comes to drape, softness, and strength of the fabric, but you've got to take into account other factors and also apply the occasion for which you're wearing the suit or using the garment. And it's the role of the merchant to optimize these combinations and categorize them into collections which are suitable for the customer and our tailors to choose from. Okay, moving on to the role of the mill and the merchant. So a company such as Holland and Sherry is both a merchant and a mill. What I mean by that is we not only design, source, and transport the fabrics, we also actually weave the fabric, have finishing and dyeing in-house ourselves. So what I've run through there, sorry, I added things, so this might not correspond to each one, but that's roughly the process from start to finish. And typically there's about 43 processes a natural wool fiber will be subject to, from shearing from sheep to shop, which is what we're talking about here. So I'm conscious I'm running out of time, but I've got some images to show you through that process. You quite quickly see it's not very glamorous. You know, these are factories, these are mills in Yorkshire. Actually, I grew up around Yorkshire and I had no interest in this industry for obvious reasons. But obviously I'm at the let's say, more glamorous side of the sales force. So don't have to spend too much time behind the scenes. So what you see here, basically, once you've taken the hair off the sheep's back, the shearing, you make them into wool tops, which are then spun into yarn. So that's the first part of the process. Within the wool top making process, you have the sorting, so you grade the fibers according to those characteristics I mentioned, your Super 160s, your Super 140s, high elasticity, high crimp, high luster, all these, they're all graded according to those factors. Scouring is essentially just cleaning. It's an animal, like I said, it's a farm animal, so it needs cleaning. It's got stuff on it before we then go into the yarn spinning process. So that's what a yarn spinning production line looks like. That's basically where the fibers are tied together in a really long line, and what is eventually then used in the weaving process. And again, weaving itself is a two-part process. There is warping, which I don't know if people are familiar with the technology, but a warp is the yarn going in the vertical direction, and a weft is the yarn going in a horizontal direction. So first you create the vertical canvas before the weft is what actually creates the pattern. So it's getting quite technical, but once all that's done, it takes typically 8 to 10 weeks to weave one piece of fabric. A piece is about 70 meters. And wool is still a natural fiber. You know, it's hair from a sheep at the end of the day, so it's temperamental and volatile. So after all that's done, there are a lot of faults in the fabric. And this is a process which comes after the weaving, before we send it to the customer, where we call mending, which is, we have a team of older ladies in Bradford who have a magnifying glass, and they spend all day, every day, either picking out faults or correcting faults. And it is typically women, because only the women have the patience and the eye to detail that it requires to do this for such a long period of time. Even still, by the time the fabric gets to the customer, there are still some faults. You know, it's not 100% foolproof, but we do our best to make sure that it's as close to perfect as we can. So we have this final inspection phase after that, where we have even further mending and fault correction. Okay, I know I'm running out of time, but it's quite fortuitously coming to the end of my presentation. Basically, I'm trying to encourage people to take more interest in fabric and what fabric they use for what purpose. You know, different fabrics are suitable for different occasions, as I kept referring to today. But take time to read about it. Ask your friends, ask your tailor. You know, there's a huge amount of information available online, or through the merchants themselves. They're happy to explain to you in more detail. And again, it's one thing to see a photo. It's another thing to actually see a swatch, to touch and feel. But the best thing is to try. I know it's expensive to try, but only through that process will you ever really know for sure what you like, what suits you, and how the fabrics differ from fiber to fiber. And again, another point to conclude is that wool, all natural fibers are luxurious fibers. You know, the production process it takes, the time and effort it requires to produce the finished product necessitates them being called luxury material. So wool, although it was the original suiting fabric, it's also very versatile and has a variety of options. And what I'm going to pass around now is some of our sports jacketing collections, which have a combination of wool, linen, and silk. So it's a blend of fibers to create a blend of performance characteristics. And then this one is a silk-wool blend, again, combining the best characteristics of two quality natural fibers. I know we're running out of time, but actually I'm hanging around afterwards, so if you have any more questions or you'd like to explore more of the samples I've brought. We also have two lovely suits here from Dior, which is a blend of fabrics. This one is a mohair wool blend, again, which is considered more of a summer option because of its lightweight, because of the performance of a mohair. This one is 100% Ottoman wool. Again, it's a very high quality type of wool, and what's unique in the characteristics, and I didn't have time to talk about today, is actually some of the weave. You get a very distinctive horizontal protrusion on the weave. So again, just finishing off that bit, you speak to your tailor, treat your tailor like your doctor or your barber. You can build up a trust, and he can understand your personality and what you like. He's making clothes to fit your body, but also your mind. So he's a very important person to have. And I guess the other point is be inventive, be creative. You're only limited by your own bravery. The rules have changed. The rules have relaxed. You don't necessarily have to wear this for this occasion or that for that occasion. You can apply your own personality and your own style. And that's the nice thing which we see is actually people are becoming creators of their own new styles rather than following social sort of expectations or pre-existing conditions. And Dior, they take a time to prioritize the quality of the raw material which they're using, which is very, very crucial for a high-performance suit, as I spent time to mention today. This example actually is the one we have here today. It's, as you see, 60% mohair, 40% wool. And again, they're echoing a lot of the benefits which I suggested. It's suitable for a summery climate, particularly a humid climate with high moisture, because as you'll see later, if I pass around the mohair, it's very dry, very crisp handle, which some people consider to be rough, but actually it's more of a functional purpose for summer temperatures. So again, they mention crease resistance, which is a feature of natural fibers, high quality natural fibers. And the way the world is today, everyone travels with a suit because everyone travels and everyone wears suits. So it's quite a high priority for you if you're traveling in a suit. For example, I traveled in this today, but you probably wouldn't notice unless you check really carefully. So young people are more demanding for functionality and versatility of suits, and that's another trend we're seeing. So it's this trend towards functionality and away from kind of preconceived taboos. For example, Savile Row is where our head office is based, and we have many, many customers for 50, 60, 70 years, but they still are a little bit old-fashioned, perhaps, in terms of their expectations. So if ever you include a man-made fiber in a suit, they probably won't even talk to you. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the point is the old school tend to reject some of the new ideas, and actually the younger people now are more demanding. So again, Dior, I think they've increased. Mostly they focus on 100% natural fibers, but they have one collection which has a 2% lycra or elastane or stretch, whatever you want to call it, which tends to be a more entry-level price point for that reason. But what it means is, and I'll pass this collection around, you have that bit more comfort because it has a slight stretchiness, natural stretchiness in the fiber, which makes it suitable for traveling. Also younger people, if you want a slim fit, you need a bit of give in the fabric, otherwise it can quite easily damage or put stress on the fiber. And actually, of course, ladies wear historically or typically would have a bit of stretch because they need the slimmer fit, and the contours of a lady's body are more nuanced, more particular. So we're seeing that trend apply across the board. Holland & Sherry historically was stereotyped as a menswear brand because of our association with Savile Row and old men, but we have a large number of female customers because our patterns tend to be quite bright and fancy. They often lend themselves quite well to female suits or female lady garments too. And again, you see here they're experimenting with different compositions to create different looks and suitable for different occasions. So it's 51% wool, 49% cotton. So blending the light casual nature of cotton with all the historical suiting attributes of a wool makes it for, let's say, a more casual sports jacket, blazer, this kind of thing, which young people you're wearing suits outside the office, you know, whether it's going out socializing with friends, maybe to, in the UK, for example, Wimbledon or Royal Ascot or the regatta, polo, all these kind of outdoor activities that require a little bit of formality but wouldn't be justified wearing a suit, is what we're seeing a lot more young people taking interest in. So when we have a jacketing specific collection like you see on these cards, what we've done is paired it with a suitable color of trouser, because typically you won't make the whole suit out of that one jacket fabric. And in the more emerging or less mature markets, people rely quite heavily on these kind of suggestions because they're from the professionals, and it takes a bit of pressure off you trying to match and coordinate, feeling a little bit apprehensive about whether your expensive suit is even going to look nice or look not nice. And so this one is an example of how we were starting to experiment more and more with different blends of different fibers, different compositions, again, trying to create different sorts of casual looks. So I'll pass this one around again. Is my vicuna out there somewhere before I lose my job? So, I mean, that more or less concludes what I want to talk about. I mean, I'm going to stay around to answer other questions. I'm sure there's representatives from Dior who can help to answer more questions about the suit. There's one last thing I'd like to show you because it was such a huge publicity stunt this year. We didn't make the fabric, but we can, and they asked us to. But it was the Conor McGregor suit. You may be familiar. So we've got it's basically where you can customize the pinstripe with your own wording. So in many ways it's a pinnacle of bespoke because the color, the content, the size, actually pass it around, Sam, it's okay, pass it. So these, again, it's a very luxurious item. It's literally a one of a kind because unless you want to get somebody else's name on your suit. This is it's the Super 140 version. It's actually got the 22 karat gold thread option again. So if it's not expensive enough, then we can make it more expensive. So there's really no upper limit to luxury. And there's a famous suit we did for the Indian Prime Minister Mahendra Modi, which was worn in his inauguration. He actually wore it in a meeting with Barack Obama. And he subsequently auctioned the suit, and it became the most expensive suit ever sold. It was almost $700,000 US it was sold for, and it was using that fabric with his name. And that money, I'm glad to say, was used to help clean up the Ganges River. It was all for charity. 好，谢谢大家，我现在差不多了。好，下课。